The click of her heels echoed across the pristine marble floor of the luxurious shopping mall. Sarah Jackson walked with an air of quiet confidence, her tailored yet understated outfit giving no clue to her true status. Today wasn't a day for boardroom meetings or business negotiations. It was a personal errand. She wanted to find the perfect birthday gift for her goddaughter, something meaningful yet elegant. Her destination was Belle Vivre, a renowned high-end boutique she'd personally fought to bring to the mall years ago. She hadn't announced her visit to the store manager, preferring to shop like any other customer. It wasn't unusual for Sarah to do this. She enjoyed connecting with the spaces she'd worked so hard to create. As she entered the store, a soft chime signaled her arrival. She browsed quietly, letting her fingers glide over racks of silk blouses and leather handbags. But the pleasant hum of background music was interrupted by a sharp voice. "Excuse me, ma'am." Sarah looked up to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with a badge pinned to his chest. Mike, the store's security guard, had a firm, cold expression on his face. "Yes." Sarah responded politely, her brows knitting slightly. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone was far from welcoming. His eyes raked over her from head to toe, pausing on her modest blazer and comfortable flats. "No, thank you. I'm just browsing," Sarah replied with a calm smile. Mike didn't move. "Browsing, huh? Look, we have a very particular clientele here. If you're looking for something more affordable, there's a department store on the lower level." Sarah's smile faltered. "I'm quite familiar with this store." "Thank you." Mike's posture stiffened. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The word struck her like a slap. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "We've had issues with certain people coming in here, pretending to shop," he said, lowering his voice slightly as if trying to sound discreet. "You don't exactly look like you belong here." A heavy silence settled between them. Sarah's grip tightened on the scarf she'd been holding. "And what, exactly, does someone who belongs here look like?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with quiet steel. Mike hesitated, shifting on his feet. "Look, I'm just doing my job. I think it's best if you leave before we have a problem." A younger sales associate, who had been watching from the counter, approached hesitantly. "Mike, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he replied curtly. "I'm just handling a situation." The associate glanced at Sarah, her expression unsure but apologetic. "Ma'am, are you looking for something specific?" "Yes," Sarah said, addressing the associate with warmth. "I'm looking for a gift for my goddaughter." Before the associate could respond, Mike stepped between them. "I said she's leaving." The humiliation of the moment burned in Sarah's chest. She noticed other customers in the store pausing to watch, their curious gazes filled with unspoken judgment. No one intervened. No one questioned Mike's authority. Sarah's voice was low, measured. "I wasn't aware that browsing in a store required permission from security." "It's not about that," Mike said, his tone dripping with condescension. "It's about keeping the atmosphere comfortable for our actual customers." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking the small amount of patience Sarah had left. She looked around the store, the uncomfortable glances, the sales associates shifting awkwardly, the oppressive weight of silence from those who witnessed but said nothing. "I see," Sarah finally said. She straightened her posture and held her head high. "You'll be hearing from me again." Mike smirked. "Sure thing, lady. You have a nice day." Sarah left the store, her heart pounding. Outside, the mall buzzed with life, but the sting of that encounter clung to her like a shadow. She paused, steadying herself. This wasn't the first time she'd faced prejudice, but it never failed to cut deep. A part of her wanted to storm back inside, to demand respect and recognition, but Sarah knew better. Her power didn't lie in loud, impulsive reactions. It lay in precision, in action that couldn't be ignored. As she walked away, murmurs followed her. "What happened? Did you see that?" But no one approached her. No one asked if she was okay. Sarah pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to her assistant. "Contact legal. I want the store manager and security guard in my office this afternoon." It's time they remembered who owns this mall. She put her phone away and continued walking, each step filled with a growing resolve. This wasn't just about her. It was about what she'd fought to build. A space where everyone could feel welcome. That vision had been tarnished today, but Sarah was determined to set things right. Would they regret their actions? Most certainly. But more importantly, this incident would spark change, starting with Belle Vivre. The meeting room on the top floor of the mall was a stark contrast to the vibrant retail spaces below. Sleek glass walls, a polished oak table, and a panoramic view of the city's skyline set the stage. At the head of the table sat Sarah Jackson, poised and calm, though the faintest flicker of anger lingered in her eyes. Across from her sat Tom Reynolds, the store manager of Belle Vivre, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Beside him was Mike, the security guard who had so boldly dismissed Sarah earlier that day. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by visible unease. "Let me get this straight," Sarah began, her voice smooth but razor-sharp. "You're telling me that this is how customers are treated in my shopping mall?" Tom shifted in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Ms. Jackson, I want to assure you, this was an isolated incident." "Mike, don't," Sarah interrupted, holding up a hand. "Do not pin this entirely on him. As the manager, the responsibility for how your staff behaves falls on you. Isn't that correct?" Tom swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah's eyes flicked to Mike, who stared at the table, avoiding her gaze. "Mr. Mike," she addressed him directly, "I'd like to hear your perspective. Why did you decide I didn't belong in that store?" Mike's head shot up. "Ma'am, it wasn't personal. I was just doing my job. You weren't dressed like our usual customers." You thought. Sarah cut in, her tone icy. "You thought you could judge someone's worth based on their appearance?" Mike hesitated, his face flushing. "It wasn't about worth. We've had problems with people loitering, causing trouble. I was trying to prevent that." Sarah leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Loitering, causing trouble, and I gave you that impression?" Tom interjected nervously. "Ms. Jackson, please understand, we don't condone." "Be quiet," Sarah said sharply, her gaze never leaving Mike. "Let him finish." Mike shifted uncomfortably. "It's not personal, ma'am. I didn't know who you were, and if I had been anyone else?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "If I weren't the owner of this mall, how far would you have taken it?" I was just doing my job," Mike muttered weakly. "No," Sarah replied firmly. "You were overstepping your job, and in doing so, you disrespected a paying customer. But worse than that, you disrespected a human being." A silence fell over the room, thick and heavy. Tom, desperate to regain control of the situation, spoke up again. "Ms. Jackson, I assure you, we'll take immediate action. Mike will be disciplined, and we'll issue an apology." Sarah stood abruptly, cutting him off mid-sentence. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound making both men flinch. "Discipline," she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "An apology? That's your solution? Do you think this is just about me?" Tom's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Sarah paced slowly, her heels clicking against the floor. "Do you know how many times I've been underestimated in my life? Judged by the color of my skin, the way I dressed, or the way I carried myself. And yet, I built all of this." She gestured to the view outside the window. "Despite people like you thinking I didn't belong." She turned to face them, her gaze piercing. "And now here we are, in 2024, in my mall. And still, this nonsense persists." Tom squirmed under her glare. "We'll make changes, Ms. Jackson. We will." "Oh, you will," Sarah said coldly. "But not because you want to. Because I'll make sure of it." She walked back to her seat and picked up a folder from the table. "Effective immediately, Belle Vivre will be required to undergo mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff. Additionally, I will personally be reviewing your lease contract with my legal team. You'll find that your place in this mall is a privilege, not a right." Tom's face paled. "Ms. Jackson, please. We've been loyal tenants for years." "Surely. Loyal?" Sarah echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Loyal to whom?" "Because it certainly wasn't to the principles I built this mall on." Mike, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to offend you." Sarah turned her full attention to him. "Do you know what I find most disappointing, Mike? You didn't just offend me. You revealed the ugly truth that prejudice still thrives, even in places meant to be inclusive. Mike nodded silently, his shoulders slumping. You need to ask yourself why you felt so confident in making assumptions about me, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its authority. And then you need to figure out how to change. The door opened, and Sarah's assistant entered, handing her another document. She glanced at it briefly before addressing Tom. This meeting is over. You'll receive the official terms by tomorrow, she said firmly. And I expect full cooperation. If not, Belle Vivre can find another mall to call home. Tom stood, nodding quickly. Of course, Ms. Jackson. Thank you for your time. Mike followed suit, mumbling another apology before both men hurried out of the room. As the door closed behind them, Sarah exhaled deeply, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Her assistant approached. Everything okay? The assistant asked. It will be, Sarah replied. She turned to the window, her reflection staring back at her. But this isn't just about today. This is about making sure it never happens again. Her assistant nodded, sensing the weight of the moment. Schedule a meeting with all store managers, Sarah said after a pause. We need to have a serious conversation about what this mall stands for. As she stared out at the bustling mall below, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Today had been humiliating, yes, but it had also been a reminder of why she fought so hard to be where she was. Because the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The buzz surrounding the incident at Belle Vivre had spread like wildfire through the mall's ecosystem. Store managers whispered about it in break rooms. Employees speculated in hushed tones, and some customers who had witnessed the confrontation shared their versions of the story online. By the following day, the pressure was palpable. Sarah Jackson, however, wasn't interested in public gossip. She was focused on setting the record straight in a way that would resonate not just with Belle Vivre, but with every tenant in her mall. She stood at the head of a conference room filled with store managers, the mall's administrative staff, and representatives from her legal team. The air was heavy with a mix of tension and curiosity. Good morning, Sarah began, her voice calm yet commanding. The room fell silent. I've called this meeting because yesterday I witnessed something unacceptable, something that goes against everything this mall is supposed to represent. The managers exchanged uneasy glances. Sarah took a measured breath. Many of you may have heard about what happened at Belle Vivre. I won't rehash the details. What I will say is this. That kind of behavior, the prejudice, the assumptions, the lack of basic human decency has no place here. Not in this mall. Not under my watch. She scanned the room, her gaze steady. When I started building this mall, I had a vision. A place where everyone, regardless of who they are or how they look, could feel welcomed and respected. Yesterday, that vision was compromised. Tom, the manager of Belle Vivre, sat at the far end of the table, his shoulders hunched. He avoided Sarah's gaze, fiddling with his pen. And unfortunately, Sarah continued, her tone sharpening, this wasn't just an isolated incident. Over the years, I've heard whispers, complaints, and reports about customers being treated unfairly. Maybe not as blatant as what happened yesterday, but damaging nonetheless. The room grew uncomfortably still. This ends now, Sarah declared. Starting today, every store in this mall will be required to implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff members. No exceptions. A hand shot up near the middle of the table. It belonged to Karen, the manager of a mid-level boutique. Ms. Jackson, Karen began hesitantly. We fully support your vision, of course. But wouldn't it be easier to just address this with the staff involved rather than making it a mall-wide policy? Sarah smiled tightly. Easier? Perhaps. Effective? No. Prejudice isn't a one-person issue. It's systemic. Addressing it piecemeal is like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches. If this mall is going to stand for something, it starts with everyone being on the same page. Karen nodded, her face flushing slightly. Sarah's assistant handed out packets detailing the new training initiative. You'll find the program outline here, Sarah explained. It will be rolled out over the next 3 months. Additionally, I'll be personally reviewing every lease agreement to include updated terms regarding anti-discrimination policies. Violation of these terms will result in penalties, up to and including termination of the lease. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some managers looked uneasy, while others nodded in agreement. At that moment, Tom finally spoke up. "Ms. Jackson," he began, his voice shaky, "I just want to say how deeply sorry I am for what happened. I take full responsibility for my part in this, and I want to assure you that it won't happen again." Sarah turned her gaze to him, her expression unreadable. "Tom," she said, her voice steady, "I appreciate your apology. But words are meaningless without action. What steps have you taken since yesterday to ensure this doesn't happen again?" Tom hesitated, his face flushing. "We've spoken to Mike, of course, and we're planning to organize some training sessions." "Planning?" Sarah interrupted. "Tom, let me be clear. This isn't about plans. It's about execution. You had the privilege of managing one of the most prestigious stores in this mall, and you allowed prejudice to thrive under your leadership. Do you truly understand the gravity of that?" Tom's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sarah sighed softly, shaking her head. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm giving you 2 weeks to overhaul your store's culture. That means training, new hiring practices, and a complete reevaluation of your management style. If I don't see significant progress, we'll reevaluate your store's place in this mall." Tom nodded quickly, his face pale. "Yes, ma'am. Understood." Satisfied, Sarah moved on. "To everyone else in this room, take this as a lesson. What happened at Belle Vivre could have easily happened at any of your stores. Ask yourselves, are you confident in your team's ability to treat every customer with respect? If not, you'd better get to work." The managers shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to speak. The meeting concluded, and the room began to clear. As Sarah gathered her notes, her assistant approached. "That was powerful," they said quietly. Sarah smiled faintly. It needed to be said, but this is just the beginning. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and phone calls. By evening, Sarah found herself walking through the mall again, this time with a sharper eye. She paused outside Belle Vivre, watching as a new team of staff members unpacked boxes and rearranged displays. Tom had wasted no time in making changes. Her gaze lingered on the store's sleek signage. The brand had once been a symbol of her hard work and determination, a sign of how far she'd come. But now, it felt tainted, a reminder of the uphill battle she still faced. "Excuse me, Ms. Jackson," a voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see a young woman, a customer, holding a shopping bag. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you're doing. I heard about what happened, and it means a lot to see someone in your position standing up for what's right." Sarah's lips curved into a genuine smile. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As the woman walked away, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Change wouldn't come easily, but it would come, and she would make sure of it. The ripple effect of Sarah's bold actions was immediate and impossible to ignore. In the days following her meeting with the store managers, whispers of her intervention gave way to open discussions. Employees across the mall began sharing stories, some of them inspiring, others disheartening, about their experiences with prejudice. Sarah's push for change had become more than a policy shift. It was sparking a movement. But not everyone was on board. Sarah sat in her office, reviewing emails when her assistant stepped in, a concerned expression on their face. "We have a situation," they said carefully. Sarah set down her coffee. "What kind of situation?" "It's Tom. He's not happy about the changes you've mandated. He's pushing back, claiming it's too much, too fast." Sarah sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Of course he is. Set up a meeting with him for this afternoon. I'll handle it." The assistant hesitated. "There's more. Some of the other managers are starting to grumble too. They think the new lease terms are excessive." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Are they questioning the policies themselves, or are they just afraid of accountability? "A little of both," the assistant admitted. Sarah nodded slowly. "Let them grumble. Change isn't supposed to be comfortable, but make it clear, this isn't negotiable." Hours later, Tom arrived in her office, his demeanor a mix of frustration and forced politeness. He took a seat across from Sarah, who regarded him with calm professionalism. "Tom," Sarah began, folding her hands on the desk. "I hear you have concerns." "I do," Tom replied, his voice tight. "Look, I understand the importance of what you're trying to do. But these new policies, they're causing a lot of stress for my team. We're a retail store, not a social justice initiative. I just think we need to slow down. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Slow down? Tell me, Tom, when exactly is the right time to ensure people are treated with dignity? Next quarter? Next year? Tom flushed. That's not what I meant. It's just the training sessions, the lease revisions, it's overwhelming. And frankly, it's starting to feel like we're being punished for one mistake. One mistake? Sarah repeated, her voice cool. Is that how you see it? A single mistake? Tom shifted uncomfortably. Mike made a bad judgment call. He apologized. What more do you want? Sarah's gaze hardened. What I want, Tom, is for you to recognize that this isn't about a single incident. It's about a culture that allows someone like Mike to feel justified in making that judgment call in the first place. It's about ensuring that no other customer, no matter who they are, ever has to endure what I did. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but Sarah held up a hand. And let's not forget, she continued, her tone sharpening, that this isn't just about your store. Every tenant in this mall is now under scrutiny because of what happened. The fact that you're framing this as a punishment rather than an opportunity to grow is exactly why these changes are necessary. Tom's face turned red. With all due respect, Ms. Jackson, you're making this personal. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes blazing. It is personal, because the moment you allow prejudice to take root in my mall, you make it personal for every single person who walks through those doors. And if you can't understand that, maybe this isn't the right place for you. The room fell silent, the weight of Sarah's words pressing down like a heavy stone. Tom finally looked away, his shoulders slumping. I'll do what's required, he muttered. Good, Sarah said firmly, because anything less than full compliance won't be tolerated. As Tom left, Sarah exhaled, allowing herself a moment to gather her thoughts. This wasn't the first time she'd faced resistance, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Later that evening, Sarah took another walk through the mall, her eyes keenly observing interactions between staff and customers. She paused outside a smaller boutique where a young black woman in a crisp blazer was being warmly greeted by a sales associate. It was a simple moment, but it filled Sarah with a quiet sense of hope. Further down, she noticed an older couple chatting with a young employee at a tech store. The employee's patience and attentiveness stood in stark contrast to the dismissive behavior Sarah had experienced at Belle Vivre. But as she rounded the corner, she caught sight of something that made her stop. Mike, the disgraced security guard, was standing outside Belle Vivre, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He wasn't in uniform. Sarah had ensured he was removed from his position, but his presence was still unsettling. She approached him calmly, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Mike, she said, her voice measured. He turned, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. Ms. Jackson, what are you doing here? Mike hesitated. I'm meeting someone. Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. I hope you're using this time to reflect on what happened. Mike's jaw tightened. I've thought about it. A lot. And I still think you overreacted. Sarah's expression didn't falter. Overreacted? You cost me my job, he said, his voice rising slightly. I made a mistake, and I apologized. But now I'm the villain? Sarah stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. Mike, let me be very clear. You're not the villain because of one mistake. You're the villain because you refuse to take responsibility for what that mistake represents. If you're more concerned about your job than the harm you caused, then yes, you're the problem. Mike opened his mouth to argue, but Sarah stopped him with a raised hand. Take this as a lesson, she said, her voice firm, because the world isn't going to get easier for people who think like you. Change is coming, whether you're ready for it or not. She turned and walked away, leaving Mike standing in the glow of the mall's lights, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. As Sarah made her way to the parking lot, she felt a renewed sense of determination. Change was hard, and it often came with resistance. But as long as she had the power to push for it, she would, because the fight was far from over. The changes Sarah implemented rippled through the mall with undeniable force. Over the following months, training programs were put into place, lease agreements were updated, and store policies were reviewed to reflect the new standards. It wasn't a smooth process. Some managers pushed back, a few employees quit, and others struggled to adjust. But Sarah remained steadfast. Her conviction came to life in the form of progress. Customers began noticing the shift. Sales associates who once seemed aloof now greeted shoppers warmly. Security personnel were trained not just to protect, but to serve with respect. The mall was slowly becoming what Sarah had always envisioned, a space where everyone felt valued. Sarah had one last step to complete her mission, a gathering of all the store managers and key employees in the mall's grand atrium. The setting was stunning, with chandeliers casting a soft glow over the crowd, and a stage set up for Sarah to address them. The room quieted as she stepped onto the stage. Dressed in an elegant but understated black suit, Sarah looked out over the audience, her expression calm but resolute. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. This moment is a culmination of months of hard work and, for some of you, significant discomfort. Change isn't easy, but I think we can all agree that it's necessary." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Sarah paused, gathering her thoughts. This mall isn't just a collection of stores. It's a reflection of our community, our values, and our vision for the future. And for too long, those values were compromised by complacency. We allowed biases to go unchecked. We allowed assumptions to dictate how people were treated. But today, we stand on the other side of that complacency. We've made progress. The crowd applauded softly, their attention fixed on her. But, Sarah continued, her tone sharpening, progress is not the same as perfection. This is not the end of the road. This is the beginning of a journey that we must all commit to, every store, every employee, every one of us. She glanced toward Tom, who stood near the back of the room. To his credit, he held her gaze and nodded slightly. "Now, I want to share something personal with you," Sarah said, her voice softening. "When I first started building this mall, there was one brand I was determined to include. That brand was Belle Vivre. I admired their craftsmanship, their elegance, and their reputation. It was a dream of mine to see their logo on our directory. I fought hard to bring them here." The crowd leaned in, sensing the emotional weight of her words. "But what happened that day in their store," Sarah continued, her voice tinged with emotion, "made me question everything. It wasn't just about how I was treated. It was about the realization that my dream had been tainted, that a space I poured my heart into had become a place where prejudice could thrive." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But instead of giving up on that dream, I decided to reclaim it, to make sure that this mall stands for something bigger than just commerce. It stands for inclusion, for dignity, for respect." The audience erupted in applause, the sound filling the atrium. Sarah smiled faintly, letting the noise wash over her before continuing. "And so, I'm proud to announce that as of today, Belle Vivre is not just a tenant of this mall. It is now under new management. My management." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by an even louder round of applause. "That store will serve as a beacon of what we can achieve when we hold ourselves accountable," Sarah declared. "And I hope it inspires all of you to look inward, to challenge your own assumptions, and to lead with empathy." As the applause settled, Sarah stepped away from the microphone. Her assistant joined her, whispering, "That was incredible." "Thank you," Sarah replied, her gaze sweeping over the audience. Over the next hour, she mingled with the attendees, answering questions and engaging in conversations. Several employees approached her to share their own stories of growth and reflection, and store managers expressed their renewed commitment to the mall's mission. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, Sarah stepped outside into the cool night air. The mall lights sparkled against the dark sky, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. Her assistant approached. "You did it," they said softly. Sarah smiled, but it was tinged with humility. "We did it, but the work isn't over." "No," the assistant agreed, "but this is a good start." As Sarah stood there, she thought about the long road that had brought her to this moment, the challenges, the setbacks, the moments of triumph. She thought about the people who had doubted her and those who had supported her, and she thought about the future. With a deep breath, she turned and walked back into the mall. The fight for change was far from over, but Sarah knew one thing for certain. As long as she had a voice, she would use it. Because sometimes reclaiming a dream meant fighting for it over and over again.